The wind howled outside the creaky old Hollowbrook house, rattling the windows and sending shivers down my spine. The rain, driven by the relentless storm, splattered against the glass like ghostly fingers tapping for entry. I huddled beneath a worn quilt on the dusty, antique-filled couch, trying to ignore the eerie presence that seemed to loom in every shadow. My name is Emily, and I had inherited this foreboding mansion from a distant relative I had never met. It stood on the outskirts of a small, isolated town, shunned by the locals for as long as anyone could remember. The day I received the call about the inheritance, I couldn't believe my luck. I was desperate for a change, and Hollowbrook House, despite its dark reputation, offered a fresh start. The first night was uneventful, aside from the unsettling feeling of being watched. I dismissed it as mere paranoia, a side effect of living alone in such an imposing place. But the following evening, as I ascended the grand staircase, a whisper danced through the frigid air, sending chills down my spine. "Emily," it hissed, a voice as cold and spectral as the wind. I spun around, my heart pounding, but there was no one there. The dimly lit hallway stretched into darkness, the paintings on the walls watching my every move with hollow eyes. "Who's there?" I stammered, my voice barely more than a shaky whisper. The only response was the echo of my own fear, reverberating through the desolate house. I hurried into my room, locking the door behind me, and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. Days passed, and I became acutely aware of the peculiarities of Hollowbrook House. Doors that were closed one moment would swing open inexplicably the next. Objects vanished only to reappear in unsettling places. I even began to suspect that the walls themselves whispered secrets I couldn't comprehend. One night, I was awoken by the sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the corridor. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and I knew there was no one else in the house. Trembling, I grasped a candlestick and crept out of my room. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The footsteps led me to a door I hadn't noticed before, tucked away in a shadowy corner of the house. The door was heavy and covered in dust, its brass handle cold to the touch. With a deep breath, I pushed it open, revealing a room bathed in a pale, ghostly light. The room was empty except for a cracked mirror hanging on the wall. I approached it cautiously, my reflection distorted in its fractured surface. The mirror seemed to ripple, and for a moment, I saw not my own face, but that of a woman, her eyes wide with terror. She reached out as if trying to warn me, but before I could react, the mirror returned to its shattered reflection. The footsteps resumed, now louder and more frantic. They seemed to come from within the mirror itself, as if the woman on the other side was desperately trying to escape. Panicked, I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening finality, trapping me in the room. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but my cries were drowned out by the relentless storm outside. I was alone with the mirror, and as I stared into its fractured depths, I saw her again, the woman in the mirror. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but her eyes spoke of an unending terror. She reached out, her hand pressing against the glass, and I felt a cold, clammy touch on my own hand. It was as if the mirror was a window to another world, and she was begging me to save her. In a fit of desperation, I struck the mirror with the candlestick, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The room filled with a deafening, anguished scream, and the storm outside intensified, as if nature itself mourned the mirror's destruction. As the shards of glass rained down around me, the room grew colder and darker. The woman in the mirror was gone, but her presence lingered in the air, an eerie presence that would haunt me for the rest of my days. I never saw her again, but the house itself seemed to come alive with malevolent intent. Doors slammed shut, and unseen hands pulled at my hair as I slept. Whispers echoed through the corridors, mocking and cruel. I knew I had to leave Hollowbrook House, but it was as if the house itself refused to let me go. The front door would not budge, and the windows were sealed shut. I was trapped, imprisoned by the very walls that had once seemed to watch over me. In the end, I resorted to desperate measures. I gathered what little strength I had left and ran toward the grand staircase. With each step, the house seemed to fight back, the walls closing in around me, but I pressed on. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard a voice, a familiar voice that had haunted my nightmares since that fateful night. In the mirror room, "Emily," it whispered, colder and more malicious than ever. With one final burst of strength, I crashed through the front door and stumbled out into the storm. I never looked back, not even when I heard the anguished wail of the house behind me. Hollowbrook House stood silent and foreboding, its secrets buried within its darkened halls. And I, Emily, vowed never to return, haunted by the knowledge that some horrors are better left undisturbed.